Good evening. We'll wait for a few more people to filter in and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, welcome. Good evening. My name is John Marion. I'm Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening for the first of our two-part Blueprint for a Great Democracy series. Tonight's event is titled Reimagining Public Meetings, and as you might suspect, it will focus on how we can rethink the interaction between Rhode Islanders and their government in the context of public meetings. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Common Cause Rhode Island, we are the Rhode Island office of the National Good Government Group Common Cause. Common Cause was founded 50 years ago in August by John Gardner as the so-called People's Lobby. We champion a variety of policies to promote accountability in government. In the course of our work, we also try to educate our membership and the general public about how government processes affect their lives. Our national office typically hosts an annual conference in Washington, D.C. called Blueprint for a Great Democracy. This year, they asked the state offices to hold their own convenings under that same banner. Blueprint is an opportunity for us to hear from people who have thought about how we can make our democracy both fairer and more inclusive. The Blueprint convenings are made possible because of the generosity of our national office and the Why Not initiative. With that funding, we are able to offer simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. I'll have Stephanie, if you'd like to give instructions.
Sí, hola a todos. Si nos acompañan hoy y quisieran escuchar la reunión en español, por favor pueden hacer clic abajo donde dice interpretación, interpretation. Va a haber una intérprete de Be More Interpreting que estará traduciendo, interpretando la reunión en español. Puede hacer clic abajo a la mano derecha. Gracias.
Thank you. And I want to thank Stephanie for recommending Be More Interpretation for tonight's event. I also want to start tonight's webinar with a land acknowledgement. The land on which we reside is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Narragansett, Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Niantic nations. There is no Rhode Island history without Narragansett and other indigenous history. There is no United States of America history without indigenous history. Thank you. Since the COVID-19 pandemic took hold in March, Common Cause Rhode Island has worked to make sure that our democracy adapts successfully to our new and hopefully temporary reality. That work has centered really around two topics. One is keeping the public in public meetings, and the other is making sure that voters have access to the ballot box. Even though we are still in the throes of the pandemic, we need to ask ourselves how we can emerge from the pandemic with a stronger democracy on the other side. That is why we chose to host these convenings, to hear from a variety of Rhode Islanders about what lessons we can learn from the changes made in 2020 to make our democracy stronger in 2021. Before we get to that, we're going to have some brief welcoming remarks from the president of Common Cause National, Karen Hobart Flynn. Karen has been a democracy activist for more than 3 decades, including 28 years at Common Cause. Since June 2016, she has served as the 10th president of Common Cause. During her tenure, we have faced unprecedented threats to our democracy. During that time, Karen has more than doubled the membership of the organization and risen to the challenges. Here's Karen.
Welcome to Common Cause's Blueprint for a Great Democracy. My name is Karen Hobart Flynn, and I'm president of Common Cause. It's my honor to share with you a little bit of background about the Blueprint conferences. First, we're very grateful to Alan Davis and the Why Not Initiative, who decided that it was important to fund Common Cause's ability to hold conferences over the next 20 years to bring activists, advocates, election officials, policymakers, funders, and other stakeholders into deep conversations and collaborations around critical democracy issues. Over the course of the last 8 years, we've held at least 24 conferences on issues like small donor, citizen-funded elections, election reforms. We held a conference called Why the West Was Winning on election reforms. It was held in Colorado to look at vote by mail, same-day voter registration, drop boxes, and election centers, and share that information with states across the country. We've also held conferences on automatic voter registration, and actually did that early on when we first started seeing reforms move in places like Oregon, where we brought together election officials and advocates to share best practices. And it really seeded relationships and the ability for people to work together and experiment and learn from each state so that they are broadening the databases that can help bring people into the system, in an automatic voter system. We've also held conferences on census and redistricting, executive branch ethics, judicial reform, open internet, ranked choice voting, income inequality, how democracies backslide. All of these conferences have been focused on how we can learn from reforms that are moving, many of them moving at the state or local level, to drive reform in other states or at the federal level. It has been a great opportunity for us to collaborate and cooperate with other organizations. We've held these in conjunction with coalitions and allies. And I think about the conference we just had in 2019, where we just focused on election protection. Funders came to the table, advocates from states across the country, and there was work on training, planning, and thinking about what we would face in 2020. And a lot of that groundwork really helped when global pandemic hit, and we had to adjust and work to move new ways of engaging and making sure that people could vote and didn't have to choose between their health and voting in 2020. So I hope that your conference today will bring forth new ideas, new strategies, new ways to work together, and I hope you enjoy the conference. Thanks.
I'm grateful to Karen for taping those remarks over Thanksgiving. As she mentioned, these conferences covered a variety of topics. Tonight, we're going to look at public meetings, specifically in Rhode Island. Public meetings are where decisions are made that affect our lives and the lives of our family and friends every day. I looked yesterday in the Secretary of State's online portal, and I counted 27 public meetings tomorrow alone, ranging from the Governor's Commission on Disabilities to the New Shoreham Deer Task Force. So public meetings are really just an important contact between citizens and their government, and they're a critical feature of our democracy, but one we tend to overlook. We've been talking a lot about elections lately, and we're going to do that in a couple of weeks at our next one. But first, we want to look at sort of where Rhode Islanders interact with their government at public meetings. As you know, there have been drastic changes to meetings since the pandemic took hold, both in Rhode Island and nationally. On March 16th, Governor Raimondo issued Executive Order 20-05, and in an instant, public meetings that had been held in person for decades, if not centuries, in the case of town meetings, were suddenly moved online. And Rhode Island, because of restrictions in the state's Open Meetings Act, had very little experience with having online meetings. We worked along with the ACLU and others to immediately make some suggestions to the Raimondo administration to encourage some best practices that we saw from other states for newly online meetings, including things as simple as stop the meeting if the internet goes down, or ask members of the public body to remain on camera, or use roll call, not voice votes during the public meeting, among other suggestions. But over the last 8 months, we've watched in real time as public meetings have really quickly evolved and adapted. While some public bodies continue to meet fully online, others have moved to hybrid meetings where some members are present in person and others are remote. I want to point to 2 resources that Jessica put in the chat regarding online public meetings. The first is a helpful guide to the law as it exists under the current executive order that was put together by the Attorney General's office. The second is a guide to the best practices for online public meetings that was put together by a group, some of whom are with us tonight, and is published by the Department of Business Regulations. So you can find links to both of those in the chat tonight. The pandemic has really been a large-scale experiment on what happens when we drastically change a law and people are forced to adapt in real time. The goal of tonight's event is to ask what lessons we should take away from this experiment. How can we use those lessons to make public meetings better than they were prior to the pandemic? It's clear from the results of the survey, which we previewed before we started tonight, and that most of you were able to fill out. When we asked you to, in the survey, do you want public meetings to remain online once the pandemic was over? We know that people want that. We know that they'll likely remain online in some form or fashion, but we also know that it may create certain types of inequities as they move online, just as there were inequities prior to the pandemic when they were in person. And so one of the reasons we're excited to have a variety of different voices among our speakers and respondents is to lift up some voices that normally we wouldn't hear from and identify some of the inequities. So hopefully we can come up with positive policy solutions that will help us reduce any problems we might encounter as we move forward. But you've heard enough from me, so let me introduce the person who's going to be moderating tonight's event. I'm fortunate that Jessica David has been my partner in planning these events. Jessica is the founder of Good Worth Working For, a community consultancy practice working at the intersection of place and capital. She is committed to building wealth, equity, and resilience in Rhode Island. Jessica most recently served as the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Community Investments at the Rhode Island Foundation, where she oversaw strategic initiatives, grant programs, evaluation, capacity building, and impact investing at the state's Community Foundation. She'll introduce the speaker and moderate tonight's discussion. We've saved time after the speakers for questions and answers, but I want to encourage you throughout tonight's program to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom, not the chat. That will help us keep track of which questions have been answered. So at this point, I will hand it off to Jessica.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. I am very excited to be with you tonight, talk about a really important and complex topic. As we look at the impact of COVID on pretty much every area of our life, it seems pretty clear. 2 things. One is that things weren't working that well for everyone before the pandemic. And 2, on the bright side, we have people on the ground in our communities who are more than capable of rising to the challenges before us and have done so in pretty heroic ways over the past few months. And I think we've seen that in large and small ways. So I think this is really an opportunity not to let this crisis, this moment of crisis, pass us by in a rush to return to something that feels normal, but to really reimagine the ways in which we serve one another and solve for the greater good. And so that's why I'm really thrilled to be here tonight with 8 very wise and caring and thoughtful community members who have a great deal of experience with engaging people around topics that matter, trying to solve shared problems, and people who have had to do a lot of pivoting and reimagining over the past 8 months, I think over and over again. So as I've learned in the past few months, public meetings are a bit of a puzzle with multiple pieces that have to fit together, from the legal aspect to the technical aspect to, I think most importantly, the very, very human aspect. And we wanted to put together a group of people who could represent that full picture and that full puzzle. So we're going to first hear from a panel of 5 leaders who each bring unique and important insights on this topic. And then at the end of the evening, you'll meet 3 community respondents who will be sharing more reflections in the weeks ahead and really doing a fuller debrief on what you hear tonight. But first up is the panel, and I'm very excited to introduce each of them in turn. We're going to be fortunate to be joined this evening by Stephanie Gonzalez, Steph Machado, David Petrarca, Brent Runyon, and Ramona Santos Torres. We've asked each of the panelists to spend about 5 minutes telling us their experience with public meetings, what they think works well, and then most importantly, their ideas for what could be reimagined to encourage better participation, more participation, and ultimately better outcomes for the community. So after we hear from all 5 panelists, we'll take audience questions and comments. And like John said, please, if you have a question for the panelists, put it in the Q&A box. We are also using the chat to share resources and ask questions, but if you put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box, it'll help us keep track of those a little bit easier. So we're looking forward to more of a discussion with all of you. So without further ado, we will get started. The first panelist up is Stephanie Gonzalez. Stephanie was born and raised in Central Falls. She's a graduate of Central Falls High School and Boston College, and she's been closely connected to schools in Rhode Island as chair of the Central Falls School District Board of Trustees, and formerly as the Associate Director of Partnerships at Blackstone Valley Prep. Stephanie is the co-founder of the Central Falls Alumni Association, Millennial Rhode Island, and Parents Leading for Educational Equity. She's also a 3rd-year law student at Roger Williams University. Stephanie, thanks for joining us this evening. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So hi, everyone. As Jessica said, my name is Stephanie. It's great to be here with all of you today. I want to thank John and Jessica for convening this panel and for allowing me to be part of it. And so when I think about public meetings, as someone who attends them, as someone who provides testimony at them, and for someone who now chairs a public meeting monthly, sometimes more frequently, depending on what's on the docket and what we need to take care of, I think about how inherently formal and structured and intimidating they can be. I think about how under-advertised they are, especially to the very stakeholders who we want to engage. I think about how sometimes they can be boring and long-winded, take too long, and be inconvenient. I also think about the ways in which they disenfranchise people. So it could be because of the complex and technical language that's used. It could be because of Robert Rules of Order. And I also think about how it disenfranchises people whose first language isn't English. And everything that I just listed is sort of wild to me, because when we think about public meetings, that's where some of the most consequential decisions happen, right? I think about my role as chair of the Central Falls School Board, and we discuss and we vote on budgets. We discuss and we vote on policy that have a dramatic and direct impact on our stakeholders, on our students, on our parents, on our teachers, on our administrators. And yet the spaces where they should be able to provide the feedback and the commentary to inform me as chair and board members as decision makers seems to not be designed that way. And so one agenda item that I take increasingly seriously is public comment, of course. I think there are questions about whether public comment should come in the beginning, whether it should come in the end or in the middle somewhere. I think it all depends, right? If you have an important agenda item that's being voted on, you certainly want to hear from stakeholders before you take that vote. There are comments that I've heard other chairs say at other meetings. I'll give an example. I've attended meetings, for example, at the General Assembly, where sometimes you'll hear chairs say things like, if someone has already made your point, please don't repeat it. And while I don't believe that disenfranchisement is the point of that comment, the effect of that comment is disenfranchisement, because the person who hears it may think, okay, I just prepared these remarks, 5 people already said what I had to say. I'm not going to repeat it. Maybe I just won't speak. I believe that the purpose of public comment should be for decision makers, for people like me in our roles, to hear the passion, the energy with which every member of the public who chooses to speak up, to share their perspective, to share their story, regardless of whether someone has already said it. Because the truth is that policy could impact 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people the same exact way, and their stories and their perspectives should be allowed to be on the record for a public meeting. So tonight we're here to think about what happens post-COVID, right? How do we reimagine the engagement around public meetings? I'll tell you that since COVID, since we've had to move to remote meetings because of COVID, we've had no less than 60 to 70 people join every single meeting. That's amazing. It means that the teacher who wants to pick up, who wants to be part of our meeting can pick up their kiddos, can prepare dinner, and still join us for 5:30 p.m. for our meeting. It's just allowed a lot more stakeholders to participate in a more convenient way for them. Zoom has this very, very cool feature for simultaneous interpretation. I'm pretty obsessed with it. You can ask John. And what it does, I don't know about other platforms, but Zoom does it very well. And what it does is that it allows for parents in the district to join us for meetings without the stigma and the othering of the consecutive interpretation. So that's when you pause a meeting every few minutes in order to allow the interpreter to interpret the previous few minutes. And it also is much better than having folks in a room who have headsets, which again can carry some stigma for some people. So I'd really love to see us move in a direction where meetings are held in person, but also that we keep the virtual aspect of it. To end, I think there are a number of ways that we can sort of make meetings more welcoming. I think even a welcome message, a thank you message to people who join meetings, thanking them for their time, thanking them for their perspective, acknowledging that we're listening intently, that we're being mindful of what they're saying. We need to turn public meetings into spaces where the public actually feels wanted, where it doesn't seem like their presence is a burden, where it doesn't seem like the decision makers have a better place to be, a more important place to be, and where it feels like public servants where public servants actually want to hear from the public. So I'll end it there because I'm not sure where I am with my 5 minutes.
That was perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks. That was a really well-rounded and I think complete view of a lot of the issues. So it was great start. Next up, we're going to hear from Steph Machado. Steph is a reporter for WPRI 12, where she's a member of the Target 12 investigative unit and covers politics in the city of Providence. Steph has extensive experience covering public meetings, most recently in Providence, where she covers the city council and other public boards. Steph is originally from Massachusetts and is a graduate of Syracuse University. She got her start in journalism in Burlington, Vermont, and she is currently living and joining us from her home studio in Providence. Steph?
Thanks so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Machado. I'm a reporter for Channel 12, and I spend many hours of my week attending public meetings, or these days, obviously watching public meetings from my couch in my sweatpants. My role is to be the eyes and ears of the public, right? So a lot of people cannot make it to these meetings. They have busy lives, jobs, kids. That is my job. I go there and I sit through what is sometimes could be boring and tedious and lengthy meetings, and sometimes are not newsworthy, but sometimes they are, and that's why I am there. Just to sort of illustrate that example, there are very often things that are said at public meetings in terms of how your tax dollars are going to be spent, or policies that have not previously been disclosed to the public. So they sort of come out for the first time in these meetings where people are either testifying or speaking or introducing various proposals. A couple of weeks ago, as an example, I was covering a meeting of the state's Council on Elementary and Secondary Education, which you may have not ever heard of, but they meet once or twice a month. And at that meeting, the Education Commissioner, Angelica Infante-Green, said for the first time, and this was something that people had been asking about for a while, that the state was going to start doing random asymptomatic testing of students and teachers in the K-12 testing system, which was sort of a big deal because everyone's been trying to figure out the prevalence of the coronavirus in the schools. And again, this was said for the first time in a public meeting that was happening over Zoom. We got an article up on our website like 5 minutes after she said it. And so that's just an example of why reporters spend so much time and sort of night after night watching these meetings, because sometimes they are really boring and they go until 9-10 o'clock at night and nothing really big comes out of them, but sometimes important stuff is said. So when the pandemic started, of course, they all went remote, and I think there's been positives and negatives to that experience. First of all, there's just the fact that you can watch from home, which is convenient for everyone. You can be making dinner, of course, or multitasking. And frankly, it's not that easy to get to a public meeting. Even myself, I'm literally being paid to go there, but I sit in traffic because many of them start at 5 o'clock or 5:30, and then you can't find a parking spot. There's not like a magical free parking lot outside the State House or City Hall for folks to park in so that they can, get to a public meeting. Sometimes you show up and the room is full because there's something on the agenda that brought a bunch of people there that aren't normally there. But most of the time, there's a very small number of people attending these public meetings in person because they're not super convenient to get to and attend. So the virtual meetings have been great for that, both, I think for myself and members of the public. But frankly, that access could have been there before the pandemic. Government bodies could have been live streaming their meetings. They didn't need a pandemic for that to happen, but live streaming equipment costs money, and the pandemic has sort of forced everyone to jump in and put the resources in to get these premium Zoom accounts or YouTube or WebEx, streaming services so that they can do the meetings remotely and comply with the Open Meetings Act as it's been changed by the governor, as John mentioned. And so I do really hope that aspect of it, the live streaming aspect of it, stays in place after the pandemic when the meetings go back to being in person. And that's going to mean investing in, equipment. You can't just stick a webcam in a corner and say we live streamed our meeting. You need microphones and proper audio so that the people at home can actually see and hear the meeting in a meaningful way. If you've ever seen like a sort of janky school committee video meeting where they're in an auditorium and everyone's super echoey and you can't understand what anyone's saying, you're probably going to turn that live stream off really quickly. So that's really important that we continue being able to live stream meetings after the pandemic, even when they go back to being in person. There's been a couple of other, drawbacks. Listen, as a reporter, for the fact that I can't be there in the room and walk up to a elected official or whomever is speaking or whoever made a decision or took an action at that meeting and ask them a question is a problem. Reporters wear comfortable shoes for a reason because we chase people down hallways. I run down the stairs and catch someone on their way out of City Hall to ask them a question so that my story that I'm going to publish that night can have more context and information. So that's been a pretty big downside to the pandemic. It's a lot easier to ignore my phone call or my text than it is to ignore me when I'm standing in front of you in person. That sort of can't be helped, but that's a reason why I'm looking forward to the meetings going back to being in person at some point. Another drawback that I have experienced is that a lot of these, when we used to go to these meetings in person, when there was an ordinance or a resolution or something being discussed, there would be a physical piece of paper that would get passed around the room and say, okay, here's the amendment we're about to discuss, or this witness is testifying and here's their packet of information and we're going to pass that around so everyone can read it while it's being discussed, while the witness is being questioned, or what have you. And that in many municipalities has sort of gone away. You can't see the documents that are being discussed when you're watching from home. And I'll give Providence a shout out here because City Clerk Sean Selleck has done a great job of putting all of those documents online in a sort of Google Cloud format for everyone to see. But a lot of municipalities have not done that. So the public watching from home can't see what's being voted on. There's no link to the document. They're not there in person. And I think that can make it sort of feel not worth it to watch the meeting, or people are just going to be confused and not understand what's being discussed. So I've probably gone over my time, but those are improvements that I think can be made after the pandemic, and I look forward to taking your questions later in the session.
Thank you, Steph. That was great. It's so important to have a strong press in addition to good public meetings. So we appreciate your perspective tonight.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is David Petrarca. David is a partner at the law firm of Ruggiero, Roku, and Petrarca. He's a solicitor and legal counsel for a variety of municipalities, public utility districts, and several municipal fire districts. And he focuses on general governance, Open Meetings Act, and Access to Public Records Act compliance, litigation, planning, and land use matters. Prior to private practice, David was the judicial law clerk for Newport County. He received his JD from Roger Williams University School of Law and his BA in history from Roger Williams University. David, we're so glad you could join us tonight. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica and John and Common Cause for putting this on. This is a worthwhile deep dive into some of the nuts and bolts, but also keeping it at a forest level. As Jessica was mentioning, I've come at these public meetings from the legal perspective, and I have to be honest, when we all were sent home back in March, I didn't know what Zoom was. I had heard of the different video platforms like WebEx and Skype and things of that sort, but Zoom, yep, okay, go fast. But in any event, one of the first things that my partners and I had to navigate for our public clients is what can be done and what should be done. And that involved a deep dive into what platforms were secure, what weren't, and dealing with that initial government executive order, what's an essential government function. And as things started to open up and it looked like beyond, we were going to get beyond just those essential government functions, to the normal business as it could be during a pandemic, we had to lead a charge in terms of getting staff and board members and council members trained on how to use these platforms. And so, there were a lot of, we'll call one-on-one, sessions with, who became the technical moderator, the hosts of these meetings, how to run them, how to, keep people on task and, be mindful of what's going on in their background. Eventually for me, that led to, an invitation to what became known as the Zoom support group over at DVR. And I just want to throw a shout out to Amy Stewart, who put that together with a wide variety of stakeholders when it comes to public meetings. And the result of that support group and many other efforts is that DVR guide that Jess put in the chat earlier. I highly recommend it. And I know the state, and from what I hear, beyond the state has benefited greatly from that guide. But that group, we learned a lot of what was working and probably more what wasn't working in keeping these public meetings functioning and avoiding the Zoom bombings and whatnot. But again, from my perspective, it was always from the legal side of things and balancing what needed to be done in order to comply with the various executive orders as they changed, and other aspects as they came up as you started going again to the broader view of what happens at public meetings. And some of that is the right of the public to participate. And from my own chair, having to sit on a lot of planning and zoning boards and things of that nature, the difference between the public meeting and a public hearing. And for those that don't know, at a public hearing, not only does an applicant, whether it be for a subdivision or for a liquor license, they have a right to put on their case and their application. And in some cases with a very strict time clock that if you don't address the application, that is the municipality doesn't address it, it's automatically granted. And balancing that with the right of abutters and the public to be able to participate in those type of hearings. Some of them require testimony under oath. And so a lot of this was kind of adapting on the fly in terms of, can we take someone's testimony, swear them in over, a video chat? What if they're on the phone? This eventually led to hybrid meetings as some of that stuff was being sorted out. That is where you had perhaps the applicant and any member of the public that wanted to participate go to town hall in a limited fashion where there was a simultaneous, Zoom meeting with a, big TV where the board and anyone who didn't need to be there, didn't need to testify, would appear, and everyone else would appear, on the town hall cam, as it were. And that required, a technological, aspect in order to meet the legal requirements. And then, while not an Open Meetings Act type of meeting, but equally, if not more important, are a lot of my clients have, financial town meetings, FTMs, or the utilities have annual financial meetings where you need people to be able to essentially vote. The meeting isn't of, the board of, water commissioners. It's of the ratepayers of that, water district, and they need to set the budget. How do you do that when you have, these restrictions in place? And while before you may have struggled to reach the statutory quorum, it was in theory easier to do it online, but you might not have been able to satisfy that in any way, shape, or form, where you had to have a, board of canvassers, people check people in. So we had to get creative. One of my communities, well, actually a few, but one larger one, did a drive-in movie theater style, where, everyone who was planning to vote showed up in their car. The board of canvassers checked in the registered voters. They wrote the number of registered voters on the windshield. Everyone who was a voter got a red or a green paddle and told what channel to tune into on the FM radio. And they attended the financial town meeting. The board of canvassers would walk up and down the rows of cars with a wireless microphone, and they got to play Maury Povich to be able to allow those folks to make comments, make motions, etc. So a lot of this was, well, what can we do? And, trying to get creative. Again, as things started to open up, how do you address some things that were normally done just strictly in person? A couple of my boards like to do what are known as site visits. If there's a particular application on a particular piece of property, the board and the public likes to get out there and see, the topography, find out where the wetlands are, how trees are situated, etc. And you'd have to post a open meeting compliant, agenda, and the public and the board would meet out there in person. And while this summer things were open enough where you could possibly have that sort of thing, you still needed to have that reasonable alternative access. And outside of someone walking around with a cell phone camera, trying to provide the view for the public, it just wasn't really working. Luckily, in one of my communities, they recently purchased a drone. So rather than holding a meeting, the town staff person who was in charge of the drone was able to fly over the site and into particular parts and post that whole thing up on YouTube. This way the board and the public had, the same view and could take a look at things. Now, those board members, some of them I think are here this evening, will tell you it doesn't still reach that, essential of being able to walk on the ground, but given everything going on, it's as close as we get. So from my perspective, moving forward, there's a couple of things I think can be done in the short term and long term in terms of keeping, sorry.
I'm giving you the 30 second
warning.
Yeah,
I will wrap it up. Thank you. So I think some of you may be aware that the state has purchased these enterprise accounts that come with all the fancy webinar and toll-free functions, and those are available to towns and state agencies, but it's not available to the public, the smaller public entities, those fire districts and whatnot. I think even if it was in a pass-through type of arrangement, that stuff that those smaller entities should be able to purchase those at a discounted rate. And I think virtual meetings should be with us to stay in some fashion, both for board members, the public, and staff. Don't forget the staff that, when you have these night meetings, it can make for a very long day if the meeting gets out at 11 o'clock at night and then they have to drive home if they don't live in that community quite far away. So I want to echo the comments made by the prior panelists and the ones to come. Everyone has great ideas, and I think the traditional town meeting is New England town meeting was seen as the blueprint for democracy, at least if you listen to the myths. And I think we can continue to make it a good meeting format and style that the community gets to participate going in moving forward. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. Those are great examples too, very practical. So our next panelist is Brent Runyon. Brent is Executive Director of the Providence Preservation Society. Prior to that, he was the Executive Director of Thomasville Landmarks in Georgia. Brent received his Master's in Historic Preservation from the University of Georgia. He focuses on community planning, citizen advocacy, housing affordability, and traditional trades training. And Brent serves on the boards of the Providence Revolving Fund, Providence Public Library, and Trinity Gateway Historic Improvement Association, along with a number of other community roles that he plays. Brent, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jess. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. In a past life, I was not a professional historic preservationist. I was actually a community member, and in my neighborhood in South Carolina, we fought against highway expansion and institutional creep that threatened the neighborhood in which I lived. And what I discovered through that process was I had a passion for advocacy for neighborhoods and people in those neighborhoods that were up against processes and people who didn't always seem to have the best interest in mind. And so that led to a career change, and here I am today. But I'm here tonight because I, in my role as director of the Preservation Society, attend at least 7 different public commissions, 5 of them being City of Providence boards, and several of those a month. And so it's been quite an experience at the 444 Westminster Street, which is where the Department of Planning and Development is, and where the meetings are held in a former lunchroom in a building that Blue Cross built, I believe, in the 60s. That experience was typically uncomfortable. The climate control was irregular. We could rarely hear what was being said all the time by commissioners, by the project proposers, and by other members of the public. That's improved somewhat as different commissions have bought different types of technology. But some of the meetings can go for 7 hours or more. That's unusual, but it's not necessarily uncommon. So to be in a room like that is definitely an experience most people don't want to have. And especially if you are not, don't have privilege of being able to set aside everything in your life to attend those meetings, it really does disenfranchise people to have to go to those meetings and wait for so long. So since COVID, the City of Providence Planning Department has done an excellent job of getting up to speed with Zoom. Some of the benefits I've noticed are that it's easier to hear the speakers because they are, well, typically if they have the right equipment at home at their disposal, it's much easier to hear them. It's always easier to hear the commissioners, city staff, and the project proposers. So that's been a pretty good experience. It's also easier to know who you're talking to. If you're a member of the public speaking to the commission, their name always appears on their Zoom square, so you know who they are, and you can often figure out what their role is on the commission, where they're coming from. They're always typically, I believe, always city residents, so you can identify neighborhoods, roles they play in the community, and things like that, which I think is helpful. As far as understanding what's happening at the meeting, I think that can be an issue. One thing the city has done very well is to publish all of the project documents online in advance of the meeting, at least 3 days. It should be more, but at least 3 days in advance. And so when they're sharing those slides, it's much easier to see what's going on. In-person meetings, there may be a PowerPoint. You may be able to see it. Sometimes they hand around photocopied or printed documents, and they aren't available for everyone in the audience. So at least with the publication online and the sharing of slides in Zoom, the public has more of an opportunity to try to understand what's happening. The other thing, and this has been mentioned, is that because the meetings can go on and on and on, I think more people are participating because they can multitask at home while they're making dinner, taking care of pets and children. And so I think from a participation point of view, that's been a good thing. Some of the drawbacks, and this, I think someone referenced this in a chat, is, or maybe one of the panelists, but it's difficult to know what's going on if you're not in the room and are able to have a side conversation. You know, on Zoom, you can have chat conversations, but it's not the same as having a side conversation in person with someone like me who goes to a lot of meetings, understands the processes, know who the people are. So I think that's a real drawback, sort of what Stephanie mentioned about being able to chase someone down and ask a follow-up question. And I do agree with Stephanie, these public meetings are supposed to be democratic processes. We need to do both in person and allow them to be virtual. So I think some of the main things they need to work on are appropriate notice far enough in advance, notification of scheduling and translation. And so I think the other thing is they give too much time to project proposers and all of their experts, and they can go on for an hour and a half or more, and it simply wears the public out. So that's one thing I hope public commissions will do, is rein in the amount of time they allow the proposers to have at the beginning of the meetings. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Brent. Thank you especially for some concrete suggestions. Those are great. So our final panelist is Ramona Santos Torres, and Ramona has been a parent advocate for over 10 years. She's primarily working with families of students with disabilities within the school system and other systems of care. She is the executive director and one of the co-founders, along with Stephanie Gonzalez, of Parents Leading for Educational Equity, or PLEA, which is a parent-led grassroots organization with a mission to fight for parent voice in education decision-making and for access to high-quality public school option for all children of color. Ramona moved to Providence from the Dominican Republic 16 years ago, and she graduated from Rhode Island College in 2018 with a bachelor's in social work. Ramona, we're so glad to have you here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jess, for having me, John, and Common Cause for inviting me. Definitely my experience with public meetings have, evolved. At the beginning, there was definitely challenges, especially around the technology. Being someone who is not necessarily technology savvy, there was, a lot of struggles at the beginning to trying to figure out, like David, I think, mentioned that, what is Zoom? What is Zoom? And then, but very quickly, I moved to, what is a Zoom link? What does it look like? Where can I find this link to access the meetings, right? So although I am someone who can manage my way somewhat through a computer, and I speak and read English, it presented challenges. Now, once I overcame those challenges, it has really allowed me to access, definitely from the convenience of my home, being able to be more informed, better informed about what's going on, especially around education, particularly now when there are so many big decisions being made and the stakes are so high. So I see a lot of potential. And hopefully, the way in which these meetings are being made accessible now online will stay. But there's definitely a lot that we need to do to make this truly accessible for people who, who have issues with technology, who are, who don't even know where to find these links. Again, there was a lot of time that we spent trying to figure out where we could find this information so we could be able to access, the meetings. And I think some of the things that we could do, I think we need to utilize more social media to broadcast these meetings. Like, I think Facebook is a great way for people who, again, might have some trouble finding the Zoom link, that they could just go to Facebook and just access the meeting. Now, with that, translation needs to be made available. I think that this is the time where technology is going to produce great things. Probably this software is somewhere already available, maybe cost a lot of money, but if we really want to engage people and hear from the voices who are being really affected by these decisions, we need to make this more accessible and definitely have translation or subtitles capability in these meetings have to be something that hopefully we can do moving forward, so we can then start to, like I think Stephanie Gonzalez mentioned at the beginning, we need to make these meetings feel that for the people who want to participate, that they are wanted, that our voices really matter and want to be, heard. And we definitely need to do a better job advertising these meetings. So again, the struggles of finding, where these meetings, when are these meetings happening, and how I can participate. How can I provide public comment? How can I do that in my native language, where I feel that, I have something to contribute and I have, a lot to say, because, if it's around education, which is the area that I am, working intensely on, it is my child. So as a parent, I really want to make sure that, my concerns are being heard. So again, there is a lot of potential, I think, and I hope that, we continue to have online meetings once we can go back to meeting in person. But there are a lot of things that need to happen to make public meetings equitable for families, for community members, for everyone who has a lot to contribute.
Thank you, Ramona. That was a great conclusion to this portion of the panel. A great reminder for all of us. So we are going to move on to questions and discussion to all of the panelists. Please, if you have some questions for the panelists, put them in the Q&A box. We have some really great questions already, and we're going to try to move through these kind of quickly. Also, I should say that we are committed to sharing out after this event a recording. We'll capture some of the really great ideas and discussion that's been in the chat and the resources, as well as trying to follow up on any questions we don't get to during this session. So the first question is from Greg Garrett, and Stephanie Gonzalez, I think I'm going to aim this at you to start, because I think you have a perspective both as participant and official. And it gets to what Brent was talking about too, of sort of the in-person aspect. But Greg's question is, can someone comment on how doing meetings by Zoom makes it harder for community members to build trust by seeing and hearing each other speak to issues? Many connections of his have been made at hearings.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would never, and hope it didn't come off this way, I would never want to see the virtual meetings take over in-person meetings. I do think that there's just a lot of value in what you mentioned, Greg, those personal connections with not just people who sit on boards and who are ultimately the decision makers, but advocates who show up all the time and can offer a perspective that a virtual meeting just doesn't quite do it for you. I'll sort of share what I've seen in Central Falls is that there are times when there's no one but the teachers union president in the room and the board. And so the reason why I stress the importance of the virtual aspect is that what I'm finding, or what I'm discovering, is that there is some comfort in being able to chime into or tune into meetings from the comfort of your home, whether it is because it's more convenient for you, right? Whether you have a kiddo, whether you have pets, whether you have a parent that you take care of. And so, but I agree with you. I agree. I think there has to be a balance between the virtual component so that it doesn't take away from the value of the in-person connections that are inherent in in-person meetings.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's great. The next question is from Jamie Bova. Also, I think references some of what came up. Great question. How do we square the criticism that a lot of public meetings can be long and boring with the fact that the only time many of these public bodies can legally discuss items on the agenda as a group is in the meeting, and the importance of hearing from all members of the public? So thinking about the Open Meetings Act and the importance of these bodies to have extensive discussions in the meeting itself, even though it makes the meetings longer. David, I'm wondering if you want to chime in on this first, and then anyone else, obviously, who wants to weigh in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm usually in the position of having to, help someone even write a more extensive agenda item so people can understand what's going to take place at the meeting. And then because no decisions can be made outside of, an actual properly advertised public meeting, you have to get into some of the pros and cons about every little point that may, affect whatever that agenda item is. So again, a common thing that I run into from a planning or zoning perspective, there are statutory enumerated, findings of fact that have to be made and discussed. And that can get lengthy. And so those meetings can go until midnight or beyond. I'm looking at some of the people on the attendee list that know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's important. And I think the ability of people to now participate, from the comfort of their home, while not the end all be all, does help alleviate some of that. They don't need to, they got kids to put to bed or dinner to make or whatever it might be, work in the morning where they can't afford to, after the meeting is done, get stuck in traffic, trying to get home, it extends that, an hour in some cases. Rhode Island might be, the smallest state, but it still can take a little while to travel to and from, depending on what your perspective is. So, you need to find that balance. And sometimes the answer is actually more public meetings, splitting up, instead of doing 10 applications on an agenda, you're only doing 5. And so you're able to, disembark and go on to a different topic or a different, group at a different time to try to ease people's ability to comprehend what's going on. But again, you're asking in a lot of those cases, more volunteers, more time and effort on their part, and I think, again, as things are becoming easier, more people are scheduling things, and it complicates the whole matter. So there's no easy solution, but the time and effort that goes into those things exists for a reason. And it's, as they say, the Open Meetings Act is a sunshine law. It's so we can see what's actually happening, as opposed to, we'll say, something happened at a town committee meeting and already decided by the time you get to, the public meeting. So I hope that helps rather than creates more questions.
Jess, can I jump in on that?
Sure.
One thing we advocate for is that, especially for like the Historic District Commission and Downtown Design Review Commission, the board members often, maybe there's one or two who has expertise in architecture. So you have other board members who are representing the community's interests, but not necessarily have expertise in those things. And other cities like Charleston and New Orleans have architectural review committees that are made up of experts. They meet ahead of the meetings to really dissect the information. They can get really into the nitty-gritty. They make a recommendation to the full board. Those meetings are also open to the public, but no decisions are actually made. So we think that would alleviate a lot of the very minutia that shows up at some of these public meetings, and around which the commissioners have really no expertise from which to offer educated opinions.
Thank you. Great suggestion. Let's see. I'm going to try to fit in a few more questions before we run out of time. This one, Steph Machado, I'm going to send this to you. This is from Francis Topping. Body language and gauging personalities is harder on virtual meetings. It's also harder to guide the conversation, especially if there are tech challenges. Any suggestions on handling this?
Yeah, I think that is really tough, and especially when people can turn their cameras off. It's hard to see their body language, and it honestly makes it sometimes a little bit easier for people they drop into a Zoom meeting, they make some giant decision that affects your life, and then they drop out, right? So I think that's a benefit to in-person meetings where you have to answer to the people in the room and talk to them afterwards, and that connection, which obviously it's not safe to do right now, but hopefully we'll be able to do in the future. I don't have a great suggestion on how to fix it in virtual meetings other than to say having cameras on is important. I have attended a great number of virtual meetings where the participants, like the members of the public, are not allowed to turn their cameras on. And I think this obviously has to do with Zoom bombing, and there's been issues of racist images being put up in the cameras and stuff like that. But it also means that when people are testifying to their public officials about the budget or whatever they want to speak about, you can't see them. It's just audio. And it would be, I think it's beneficial to see that body language and have that as much of a personal connection as you can have over video chat, so that you can see the emotion in people's faces as they're saying, please don't vote for this, or please do vote for this. And so that's my only suggestion, but I also think it's a problem that maybe won't be solved until we go back to in-person meetings, which is unfortunate, but is the world that we're in right now.
Thanks. I think this is unfortunately going to be our last question. I'm going to aim this at Ramona, but also if anyone else wants to jump in. And this is from Maya Farish, and I think is a great question and point for all of us, everyone tonight to consider. Maya says, this is such an important conversation. Who should have been attending, who did not attend, and how can Common Cause better reach the folks that would benefit from this discussion and serve their constituents optimally? This is a how we can help question, not a criticism.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of us have to do better, including community members who are part of these conversations. We need to talk to our people and bring this message along. I think that who is not here, people of color, like a lot of my families that don't speak English, I wish they could be here. I think just parents in general, community members who are invested, but they are just having a hard time connecting and having access to these meetings. But I think it's everyone is doing their best. And I think that even, as much as I am someone who likes to peek and point out the things that we could do better, I think that we are doing somewhat the best that we can, but I would like to see more collaboration across like community agents who actually have access and serve those, communities, and how we can, through those agencies, make those connections to bring people to the table. So I hope that makes sense. I think it's about collaboration. I think in this time, we have to leverage every single one of us as people and the work that we do, what we represent in our communities, to make sure that people are connected. This is a lot about being connected to one another and to information that matters.
Anyone else want to take that question? All right, I think we have time for one more then. I'm going to squeeze this one in. For any of you. Some public meetings are scheduled for times early in the day, such as 8:30 or 10 a.m. or early afternoon. Do any panelists have feelings about whether this should be allowed or not? So during the workday meetings. Brent.
I mean, there's no perfect time from what I've seen. Someone is going to be unable to attend. I think it might be, maybe it should be geared towards who is going to be most affected by the issues. So if it's parents, when are most parents able to attend meetings? If it's, unfortunately, I guess what I kind of would like to see rotating, like maybe sometime they're during the day, sometimes they're in evenings. We do see the same people all the time at planning and design meetings, often older privileged white people. We just had a panelist at our symposium who gave a talk about her research showing what that does to democracy. And so we'll be posting that. I can share that resource with you to share out, but it definitely is an issue. And I don't think there's a perfect time.
Great. David, did you want to jump in?
Just briefly, I mean, outside of, let's say, scheduling something for the middle of the night, which maybe the General Assembly would like just to do, but I don't think you can really put too much of a limit on, unfortunately, getting people together, just again, from my side of the aisle, if you will, of trying to get a quorum together sometimes when something has to happen in a timely fashion, that you have to, deal with, what's available. But, the business day and then the early evening, I think is standard. And as long as you make it, I think, regular, as Brent was saying, geared towards the audience as much as you can that, is affected by what that board or commission is working on, that's the best you can do. But every once in a while, yeah, you got to hold a 10 a.m., council meeting to address something that has, happened. It might not fit under the emergency provision under the OMA, but it's something that still needs to happen in a timely fashion, and that's when everyone's available. I've been on the side of just having to make that happen in the past. So there's no easy answer, as always.
I think that's one of the themes of this conversation. I think we're going to have to wrap up this panel right here, unfortunately, but I want to again thank each of you. Thank Ramona and Brent and David, Steph and Stephanie for joining us this evening and for sharing really good insights and experience and expertise. And Rhode Island's very fortunate to have you serving our communities, and we're very grateful for you for sharing your time tonight. So thank you. I do apologize. We have several other questions in the chat, in the Q&A box that we were not able to get to. We promise to take those back and try to respond if something Common Cause can respond to, or ask our panelists to respond to, and we'll make that part of the follow-up package. And I think it's pretty clear this is just the beginning of a dialogue around how to reimagine public meetings. And so part of what we wanted to do is not just have this one session, but really extend beyond that. And so we've asked 3 additional members of the community to listen in today, to take in what they heard from the panelists and what they know from their own experience, and then at a later time share their thoughts about and their real best ideas for reimagining public meetings. And those responses you'll be getting in video format through your email within the next few weeks. But I did want to invite our 3 respondents on screen at this time, just to give them really just a minute or two to reflect quickly and give us maybe a quick sneak preview of what their biggest takeaways from the evening have been. So I'm joined by our 3 respondents. We have Christina Bevilacqua, Liza Birkin, and Sean Selleck. Just very quick introductions, although many of you probably know these folks. Christina is the Programs and Exhibitions Director at Providence Public Library and Conversationalist in Residence at Trinity Rep. That is a mouthful of a title. And she's been convening conversations in this community for many years in many contexts. Liza Birkin is the lead organizer of the Providence Streets Coalition, and she's an urban planner, mobility justice advocate, writer, and gardener. And Sean Selleck is currently the Providence City Clerk, and Sean has spent most of his career managing large technology projects in both the private sector and for government. So I just want to turn it over to each of you. We'll start with Christina, and then Liza, and then Sean, just to offer a few words of sort of your main takeaways and reflections from this evening.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and to everybody. This was such a fascinating conversation. As somebody who does not spend most of my time in legal public meetings, but in lots of public gatherings, and certainly I do attend some public meetings. What I'm really fascinated by is how much of this conversation we're having now is about the dynamics that we never thought about before, we never had to think about. And I think what's happened in that experience is that those of us that had expertise and comfort in spaces, suddenly our expertise didn't matter, didn't really work. We needed new expertise. And that, I think, gives us a kind of understanding of what it's like to not have access, to not be able to gather, to not be able to participate, and to have to rethink all of that. So I think, you know, the takeaway for me tonight was somebody said we had to get creative. I think we've all had to get really creative and thinking about things that were just that we hadn't thought about in many, many years. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity. So looking forward to what happens next. Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. Liza?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. My role, my job at the Streets Coalition is actually centered on increasing public participation in public processes. And so I think about this stuff constantly. And I think from what and especially from what I was hearing in the chat, I think, or reading in the chat, I think John at one point asked what other experiences folks have been having about what other tools besides public meetings people have been experiencing throughout COVID. And I was reading answers and it really solidified for me like the fact that I think the only public bodies, these boards, commissions, departments, even the General Assembly, if they think that a public meeting is the only tool for public participation, that's the real failure. It can only just be one tool in the toolbox, and creativity extends to so many other methods, whether that's the surveys or farmers market tabling, canvassing, and more and more and more. And we should always be pushing the limits. And also, some people were talking about marketing. I come from a journalism background also, and strategic communications, and just more of a marketing budget, more communications professionals within public bodies who have the expertise and the technical know-how for cutting through the noise and getting to people so that they know when and where they can participate.
Thank you, Liza. Sean?
Thanks, Jessica. There are a few topics that were mentioned this evening that I'm looking forward to responding to, and many of them seem to be related to the thought that we should be seeking to create an environment that makes it as easy as possible for citizens to share and advocate for the ideas that are important to them. Brent Runyon started his presentation this evening with an anecdote about how advocacy brought him to public meetings. Stephanie Gonzalez spoke about how much room for improvement we have to allow citizens to voice their opinions before a decision is made. Steph Machado spoke about how just physically getting to a room has hampered her ability to be a public advocate as a reporter in the past, and how now that ability is hampered by not having the opportunity for impromptu questioning of elected officials immediately after public meetings. David Petrarca shared innovative techniques that have been employed to allow advocates to participate during the pandemic, and Ramona Santos Torres echoed and expanded on ideas mentioned by Ms. Gonzalez related to the need to make it comfortable for those who prefer a language other than English to advocate for themselves. So if this series produces a few solid ideas and recommendations for improving opportunities for advocacy, it will have been worth it. And so a significant portion of my response will be developed with this goal in mind. Thank you to the panelists, to Jessica David and to John Marion and Common Cause Rhode Island for putting this series together.
Thank you all. I know we asked you just to respond in 60 seconds to a whole lot. So I am really excited, and I think others will be too, to hear more of your thoughts in the next few days. So I'm going to turn it back over at this point to John to close us out.
Great. Yes, and let me add my thanks to the speakers, Stephanie, Steph, David, Brent, Ramona. Can't thank you enough for your insights. You've given us a lot to reflect on, and we can see that from the chat and the questions. I think you really stimulated an interesting conversation here. I'm also really looking forward, as Jessica said, I'll just reiterate, we're going to hear from Liza, Sean, and Christina in some more extensive follow-up in the weeks to come. So we will be sending that to you by email. That email will also contain a very brief post-event survey that we'll ask you to fill out. We'd love to get your feedback on tonight's session, especially as we plan our session for December 13th. As I mentioned at the top, the December 13th event is going to be on reimagining elections in Rhode Island, and you can go to commoncause.org/blueprintri to register for that. And Jessica put that in the chat, that link. Finally, we want to just grab your first thoughts here. So in this slide and in the chat, there is a short link to a whiteboard of sorts that you can just put down some initial thoughts if you'd like. We'd love to capture what you're thinking. So in order to wrap up here, I just want to again thank Jessica David for her help in planning and executing this event, to Shirley Moore of Be More Interpreting for her simultaneous interpretation tonight and her translation of the materials you see on the screen, to Sam Ogundari of Common Cause Rhode Island and Rebecca Timmons of our national office for their technical assistance tonight. Really appreciate your coming out on a Sunday night and being committed to making Rhode Island a better democracy as we emerge from the pandemic. Please be safe. And I'd say have a safe drive home, but we don't need to say that anymore. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.